Hello, folks. Welcome to India to Germany. I'm your host, Paras Mehta, and today's episode is about something that Germany is famous for. It's PhD and academic research opportunities. And to shed some light on this topic, today I have with me Professor Biprajit Sarkar, who is University Professor and Director of the Institute of Inorganic Chemistry at the University of Stuttgart in Germany. Welcome, Biprajit. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very much, Paras, for having me in your podcast. It's a huge pleasure, of course.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll jump right in and ask you a couple of questions. Yeah, my first question is perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yes, so I, of course, come from India, as should be obvious from my name. So I grew up in a small town called Barpeta Road in Assam. So this is about 100 kilometers from Guwahati. So I did my schooling there until the 10th grade. Then I spent 2 years in Guwahati for my 11th and 12th. Then I went to Delhi University to do my Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry. Then to IIT Bombay for my Master's of Science also in Chemistry. And then that's when I moved to Germany. So that's more or less my background.
Wow, yeah, so you've moved around a lot in India and I guess also outside India.
Yes, it's somehow typical if you grow up in the Northeast and want to be in academics, let's say.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, you came to Germany so for your PhD.
Yes, so I came here to do my PhD, and then through a set of coincidences, I ended up staying back. That was not the plan, but then
Okay.
things worked out, and then I stayed on.
Well, why is it that then? So, was Germany your first preference, or did you actually, for example, prefer to go to the US or to the UK?
No, so in my case, I really applied only to Germany. So there are several reasons for this. One is, of course, what you already said in the introduction. It's a country that is really well known for its research. I mean, now, of course, I think everybody knows this, but even back then, if you informed yourself, you figured this out quite easily and quickly, I would say. So going to the US was out of question for me because I didn't have the money to write all those expensive exams and also pay a fees to apply to every university. I find it absurd somehow. But anyway, that's their system. And in the UK, at least in the time that I applied, 2001, there were not that many opportunities to do a PhD. So this professor in India with whom I did my master's project at that time. So he was the one actually who brought Germany to my attention. And then I applied and things worked out and then I came here.
Oh, that's nice. So, did you apply to many different universities?
No, so I had applied actually only to two. One is or was Stuttgart, where I
Okay.
again am now. And the other place was actually FU Berlin, where I also was a professor for several years now.
Okay.
So we have weird coincidences. I ended up taking up the offer in Stuttgart for doing a PhD because it matched better with the kind of things that I wanted to do.
Oh, so it must be very interesting to be like on the other side of, yeah, let's say the lecture room and be the professor and not the student or the PhD candidate.
Yes. So there are advantages and disadvantages to that, of course. I mean, the advantage is if you want to, I think you can really do a lot of positive things, change things that you do not like in the system, and so on and so forth. The huge disadvantage, of course, is that the spotlight and the focus is already always on you. So you need to be on your toes.
That's true. That's true. One doesn't think about that when, as a student going to the university, for example.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I didn't think about that myself when I was a student.
So you did your PhD from the University of Stuttgart.
Yes, so I basically followed, I would say, a very classical path so far as the German academic system is concerned. So I came here to do a PhD, which I finished, and then I went for a postdoc to France. So my original plan was doing a postdoc and then going back to India. But then during the time that I was in France, an opportunity to do a so-called habilitation. So that's what you have to typically do in Germany if you want to start an independent career in academics. I mean, these days there are several options, but let's say that's the most classical one. So there was this opportunity in Stuttgart where I already was before. So then I didn't actually think much about it because there was an opportunity. I just took it up and then came here. So came to Stuttgart, worked on my habilitation. So that's when you need to generate your own ideas. You need to start a group. You need to get third party funding, write proposals, publish independent papers, and so on. So this I did, and then more or less at the time that I finished my habilitation here, I had two job offers for a professor's position. One was in Dresden, the other was in Berlin. So I took up the offer at the Free University in Berlin. This was beginning of 2012 when I shifted. And then I stayed there for 7.5 years. And then end of 2019, I moved back to Stuttgart, actually to the position that was formerly of my former PhD supervisor who retired. And then I interviewed and I got selected. So I came back to where I started from, so to say.
Oh, that's a really good coincidence.
Yeah. So sometimes things work out.
Yeah, that's true. That's very nice. That's very nice. So from the time that you started your PhD until you finished your habilitation and actually got a position for a professorship, how much time did that take in total?
And so my PhD was about 3.5 years. My so and then I spent 6 more months in Stuttgart at that time. My postdoc was fairly short. This was just 1 year. The habilitation was 5 years, but then the habilitation is actually comparable to what you would call, let's say, an assistant professor in India.
Okay.
With the difference that at least in a classical habilitation, there is no way to get a tenure at the same university. So you have to move away for a permanent job. But by now, there are other systems in Germany where these so called junior professorship positions come with a tenure track. So then you have the chance to stay on at the same university if you are evaluated positively.
That actually brings me to my next questions. What might be the different career options once you have finished your PhD in Germany? So one thing you already said. So one could go on and do a habilitation, and then after that look for a tenure position.
Yeah, so let's say, of course, what you can do after a PhD, or if you would do a PhD at all after your masters, this is very much dependent on the field of studies, of course. But in a field like chemistry, I would say in Germany it is very, very common that you do a PhD. But after you do that, the kind of career options that you have, this is very broad. So academics is, of course, one option. We discussed this briefly, and I will come back to this in a moment. But most people who do a PhD in chemistry in Germany, they actually do not go into academics. So I would say something like 10% maybe go into academics, or maybe even less, definitely not more. So
Wow, that's
most
very
other
interesting.
people, they would go on to do some other job. So the chemical industry in Germany is very strong, maybe even one of the strongest in the world. So there are many people with a PhD in chemistry who go to the chemical industry. And then these jobs can be of many different types. So you can be in real chemical production, but you can also be working for a automobile company, automobile industry, trying to make catalysts for car exhausts, or doing research on batteries for electric cars, and so on and so on. Then there are a lot of jobs in quality control of various types, because I think for most kinds of quality control, you need some kind of knowledge of chemistry. So for food, drinks, and so on, it's of course very easy to imagine. But also, I think for hard material quality control of that, you need a knowledge of chemistry. Then there are lots of jobs in the analytical field, so that's quite huge. So forensic departments, that's related to analytics, of course. Then there are also quite a few jobs in the fields of safety and security related to chemicals, because this is also a huge issue everywhere. And then there are also people who go on to become editors of journals, or do scientific writing. So that is also an option.
All these are full-time career opportunities.
Yes, these are really full-time career opportunities, and most of these jobs are actually, you get a fairly decent salary in all of them.
And as in academic research, is the only option are the only options what we already discussed. So either basically doing a habilitation or getting a junior professorship.
Yes, so right now the system is a bit complex and diverse, I would say. So there are advantages and disadvantages to this. Um, so if you want to stay on in academics after a PhD, you would typically do a postdoc. We already discussed this. Then you have the chance of either doing a habilitation, or you can become a group leader. That is slightly different, because these group leader positions, they are usually either associated to some big projects that are run at universities, or other research institutes, or you come with your own stipend. So there are federal funding agencies that fund people at the start of their careers, also their own salary. So those would be group leader positions, or you become a junior professor. This is another option, and these junior professorships, sometimes they come with the option of getting tenured at the same university. So these, I would say, are the best options, because then you already have quite a bit of job security even when you start with such a position. And then there are others that are without tenure. But then if you do well, I think chances are not that bad that you then get a permanent position after that. Yeah, so those would be the various options of starting your independent career in Germany if you want to be in academics.
Okay, that's great. So you mentioned job security. I wonder. So if you get a tenure position, of course, that's wonderful. You have a settled career, and you have a lot of job security. Otherwise, how high do you think are the chances that someone gets a tenure position? And if someone doesn't get a tenure position, what options do they have?
So in terms of this turnover number, this is a bit hard to put this in black and white, because I think it's really very, very dependent on not just the broad field like chemistry, let's say, but really in the subdiscipline of a field that you are working on. So this varies quite a bit. So I think getting a number there would be difficult. What the chances are, but let's say from what I have seen, people who have been successful during this initial so-called temporary phase, almost all of them have gotten a job. What can happen is that you might have to move places. Sometimes you also have to move countries. So this happens if you really want one of these professor kind of jobs. However, there are several other options. If, let's say, after this temporary phase, you do not get a so-called permanent position in the German academic system. So one option would be to become a permanent scientist, either at a university or at a research institute, like Max Planck or Fraunhofer or something like this. So there are also quite a few jobs in that direction. You can always go to the industry. So this also works. I know of one or two people who have done this. Scientific writing, I mean, if that is something that you have a talent for, this is something which would certainly work. But then, I don't think everyone can do this. Other than a sound scientific background, I think you also need some kind of talent in writing. But if that's the case, this would be another option. And then there are these places for vocational training that also look for chemistry lecturers, or lecturers in various disciplines. I mean, I'm talking about chemistry because that's my field. So that is another option, which then is a pure teaching job. So even if, let's say, after this temporary phase, for whatever reasons, things do not work out, you do have quite a few options of doing something else.
Okay. So that kind of also leads me to my next question. How would you, so I mean, normally, like if someone is coming from India, one would always, or one would often think about going to the US or to the UK or to other English speaking countries and doing a PhD or doing research there. From what I have heard, the system for doing PhD, the programs for PhD in those countries differ from those in Germany. So how would you compare those, and are there any advantages or disadvantages between the two?
Okay, so let's say in terms of maybe just to make this point about the language. I mean, of course, if you come from India, you grow up speaking or knowing English in some form or the other. So then, going to a place like the UK or the US somehow seems like a natural choice. I mean, this is what most people would say. So I would like to differ in that point. I mean, because of various reasons. The first one is, so if you were coming with the sole intention of doing research, then German is not a compulsion. I mean, so research all over Germany, irrespective of the university you go to. So I'm talking about, let's say, natural sciences and engineering. Research is done in English, so language is not an issue. And particularly if you are in a big city, like Berlin, where you are, or Stuttgart, where I am right now, even for your day-to-day life, you can get almost everything done by speaking English. I mean, of course, for your private life, if you know the local language, this is always an advantage. So there is no point in not putting that into context. But just purely for your work, I don't think you need German if you are coming here to do research. So that's in terms of language. Now, in terms of other advantages and disadvantages, so one huge advantage of the German system in terms of doing a PhD is that the amount of time that you would need typically is actually shorter than the US. maybe even shorter than the UK. I mean, compared to the US, it's certainly shorter because you do not have these coursework and so on at the beginning. So right from the time you arrive, you would start doing research. Also, the public perception of research in Germany, I think, is very, very positive. This is certainly not the case either in the UK or in the US. I think the general public there do not care much about research anymore. This is certainly different in Germany. There is always this discussion about structured program versus individual PhD, not a program, but let's say individual PhD opportunities. So this is blending out in Germany, I would say. So by now, of course, there are quite a few structured PhD programs. And in all these individual PhD programs, I think by now at every university, you do have some amount of structure that comes in from the faculty, that they expect you to attend a certain number of conferences. So basically, the supervisor has to make sure that you attend a certain number of conferences, that you attend a certain number of soft skill courses, and so on and so on. So things are, even in the individual PhD positions, getting quite structured, I would say. So there still are some differences, but not much. In terms of disadvantages, I cannot really think of many. Maybe one small point is, as I said, you more or less start doing research from the time you arrive. So that means the amount of time you have for training is perhaps a bit less here compared to the US. So you are expected to have already have certain set of skills from your undergraduate studies. So from my observation in the recent times, at least in chemistry, I think most good institutes in India, they now give quite a lot of practical training to their students. I mean, or theoretical training if someone is in theoretical chemistry. So this is not a disadvantage anymore for Indians. It used to be in the past, but I think right now people are actually well equipped to start right from day one.
Okay, that's very interesting. So actually, I'm also then curious to know a little bit about what is uh, what is it like to do PhD or academic research here in Germany. So if yeah, normally I would think about what does a typical day in a researcher's life look like.
Yeah, so let's say on most days you would be really doing the research that you are meant to do. So in our field, practical chemistry, you would be working on the bench most of the times, or using instruments to collect data, which then you would analyze. So this would be the main part. So basically, you would together with your supervisor and a team, if there is one, so subgroups, you would come up with a plan, and then you try to execute that plan. Of course, this would always keep going back and forth, that you get some results, you discuss this either directly with your supervisor or with other members of the subgroup, and fine tune it and try to do other things, try to find explanations to data analysis, and so on and so forth. At many places, particularly at the universities, you also need to do some amount of teaching. This is not much, I would say 10 to 15% of your time. And by teaching, I don't really mean taking a lecture. It's more supervising students for their lab courses, or holding a tutorial, or things like this. Then there are many places that would also expect you to work on some grant proposals. So I personally think this is quite a positive thing because it gives you a lot of experience for your future. And then, of course, there is the writing of papers, of contributions for conferences, or your thesis. And then, of course, you would, in many projects now, there are collaborative work. So then you would also go to a different country or a different lab within Germany to do part of your research there. Yeah, so this would be roughly how a typical life of a PhD student would look like.
Okay, so the main focus is on research, but there might be optionally teaching to do, and for example, some grant proposal writing, depending on the group, for example.
Exactly, and then I think manuscript writing for your papers, this would be probably compulsory across the board, I would guess.
Yeah, yeah. And what does the financial aspect look like? So, for example, does one get paid to do some of these things, or is it expensive to do a PhD? Or
No. So if you are offered a PhD position, it would necessarily come together with its own finances. So you would either have a stipend, or you would be paid by the university, or you would be paid by some research grant that your supervisor has. So you definitely would not have to spend any money at all. So I think the only money you would spend is to buy your first flight ticket. And
okay,
if you do not have that money, like me, I did not have that money, you just need to borrow it from someone or from a bank, because within, let's say, 2 to 3 months of your stay here, you should be able to pay back that money that you would need for your flight. So the amount of money that you would make per month, this is not very high, but it's definitely more than enough to lead a good life here. And in my opinion, it's also enough to save some money and send back home if you have responsibilities. So I did this, and I never felt that I was compromising on my quality of life here. So the salary that you get, it's not exorbitant, but it's definitely more than enough to lead a decent life and also save up something.
okay, yeah. I mean, that's really a relief because then one doesn't have to think about money or financial aspects, and one can focus on the research that for which one is here in Germany, for example.
Yes, certainly. So the thing is, you will only get a visa to come and do your PhD in Germany if the university gives an assurance to the German Foreign Office that there are enough funds from the side of the university or through a research grant to fund your stay here. Yeah, so this is quite safe, I would say.
All right. Okay. So let's say I have now decided to do a PhD, or I have decided to apply for a research position. I guess the first step would be I would have to choose a university or a specific research group. What would be your suggestion about what I should look for while choosing a university or a research group?
Mhm. Yeah, so this gets a bit more trickier, I would say, for the German system compared to at least the US system, because typically if you want to go to the US, you would apply to the university, and if you get admitted there, you would then worry about which group, what kind of research, and so on. So let's say on paper that might appear to be a better system, but if you take into consideration that your primary objective in doing a PhD is actually to do research, then that might not be the best approach. At least that's what my opinion is. So if you are looking for a place to do a PhD, I would say the way to go about this is to think about a research field that is of interest to you for whatever reasons. Either you find it academically stimulating, or you think there would be lots of jobs in that field in the future, or whatsoever. But I think it's important to more or less define a field for yourself, and then search for uh, good people in that field. And as I said, particularly in good institutions in India these days, uh, the undergraduate students, they get a lot of hands-on experience in direct research, into direct research. So I think for them it should be possible, once they have defined a field for themselves, to figure out, which are the 20, 30 names in Germany that do good work in that field. And once you have decided on that, or once you have narrowed things down to that, then you need to see if these people are at a place that offers a structured program, structured PhD program. This is not very common, but I think some Max Planck institutes and a few universities, they have this. Then you can apply through that program. If not, then you would just have to individually write to the professors or the group leaders. So contact them directly, and then of course, when you try to contact them, it's always better if you have a good idea about what they are doing and about what you want to do, and then formulate your cover letter or email in a way that comes across as genuine and as interesting. Also, there are from time to time various universities or research institutions from Germany, they go to India and hold these fairs. So I think it's worthwhile to go there and to have a look at what they have to say, and if there are some relevant people around there, to just directly talk to them. Contacting the DAD office in Delhi, or I think several German universities now also have offices in Delhi. So contacting them via email or telephone, or if you are in Delhi, just to go there. This will certainly be helpful. Twitter, it turns out these days, is a very good place to figure out vacancies. And I think most young people are on Twitter, so that would be another thing to look for. And then if you know someone who is already here, students, PhD students particularly, asking them for advice, this is always a good idea, I would say. Yeah, so these would be some things to keep in mind if you are planning to apply to the German academic system.
Okay. And to actually send the application, one just needs basically like a small description of what the idea for the research or the topic for the research is, and maybe a CV.
A CV, a detailed CV would be very important if you have any kind of research experience, to mention that in some detail, what you have already done. And then, of course, to explain what you would like to do and how this fits to the work of the person that you are applying to. Yeah, so these generic emails, yeah, I would say one should avoid that, because people usually are put off by those emails.
And so, are there any specific topics for research within inorganic chemistry that you think have a good research potential?
Yeah, so right now there are several fields which are very, very prominent. I mean, not just in Germany, but the world over, I would say. So catalysis would be one topic. So this is not just in inorganic, but let's say in chemistry in general, because it really affects all parts of our lives, from getting food to the automobile industry to the environment to energy and so on and so forth. So catalysis, I would say, is very, very prominent. Then there are now in Germany, there are lots of opportunities in the direction of renewable energy. So either through batteries, or through finding chemical ways of generating renewable energies, and things like this. So there is also a lot of work happening in the direction of medicinal research, also in inorganic chemistry. And then materials remain a big subfield of inorganic chemistry. So it can be materials for in various fields. So optical materials, magnetic materials, and so on and so forth. And so these are some of the prominent research fields within inorganic chemistry that I would say are very, very relevant at the moment.
Okay. And one thing that I mean, I guess many people who are applying for such positions wonder about is what is it that professors, for example, look for while hiring PhD students or researchers. So you already mentioned some things that, for example, one should try to send an application with some showing some background knowledge of the field.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other things that someone who is in a hiring position like you would think about?
Yeah, so of course this is very, very subjective, and I'm sure people, they would act in slightly different ways. I mean, depending on who the person is. But I think one or two things that would be fairly or that would come across as fairly positive to everyone is if you already have some kind of research experience. So I think if you are in one of the IITs or one of these new ISERs or NISERs or at TIFR, I think there are various project work and one or two theses that are compulsory part of your curriculum. So I think it is important to do those things well and to collect as much knowledge as you can during these project work or thesis work. And if you are not in one of these institutions, and if your own institution does not offer something like this, I think it would be a good idea to try to do these things during the summer break. And then, of course, you should have a professionally written CV, a professionally written cover letter, and so on. So these things through the internet these days are I think, very easy to formulate well. But these hands-on experience with various things, I think that is something which is counted as very, very positive in the German system. Because as I said, usually you would just start working on your topic more or less from the beginning that you arrive here. So if you can already prove that you have several past experiences, this is always helpful. And what is perhaps also important is, by now in the Indian academic system, you have a lot of professors and group leaders who have been through the German academic system, either for their PhD or for their postdoc. So to talk to these people and somehow get connected to PIs in Germany through them, I think this is also a very good way of doing things.
That's true. That's a very good tip. I agree. Yeah, and I think my last question would be if you have any suggestions for resources or opportunities that you think that people from India or people from other countries should keep in mind while applying for a PhD or for research in Germany.
Yeah, so I would say the DAD is a very good source. So they also offer stipends for doing a full PhD. Not that many, but they do offer some. But their website is usually very good for various kinds of information. So they would also have things like cost of living and other general stuff that you would actually need if you were to come here. Then I think by now in most countries, in India certainly, in the metros, Delhi is the most prominent because it's the capital. So there are several offices of various German academic institutions. So DAAD has an office. Then the German Science Foundation has an office. I think the Ministry of Education has an office. Several universities have an office, and if I know this correctly, I think they are all housed in the same building, or maybe two buildings. So if you are in that area, to just drop by and interact with these people or write them emails, find information. If you get information, or if you just hear about some scientist from Germany giving a lecture in your institution or at a neighboring institute, go there, listen to these talks, interact with them. And then I think if you have a clear idea of what you want to do, this will always help you in achieving your goal, I would say. Then try to build up contacts, either directly or through your professors in India, through your supervisors in India, through your parents, friends, whatsoever. This is important and useful. Get some research experience if you can during your studies. And then I think just extensively look at the individual websites of every research group, because these are usually quite elaborately done these days, and you can get a lot of information from there. And if you find relevant students in these groups, you can also contact them directly. So these would be some ways of let's say tackling this big issue of how do I apply.
Yeah, that's a lot of very useful ideas. So thank you. Thank you very much, Biprajit, for sharing your experience, your advice, and all these insights with us.
Thank you very much for having me in your podcast. I hope at least some of this information will be useful to some people.
I'm sure. I'm really sure. That's all, folks. Remember to subscribe to our podcast and check out our blog on indiatogermany.com. See you next week.